Probably 40 overnight.
That's pretty hot.
Is that when you had that mullet?
No.
Hello, and you're listening to Game of Nodes, a weekly podcast on the Cosmos from independent validator teams. And it is very, very, very hot in Europe. It is probably very cold in Australia. It's probably very normal temperature where Usurper is. So different levels of bothered probably from our host this week. Noel, we were just talking about his amazing mullet. We found out that he has an alternate alias as a pro golfer. Usurper's very convinced on this fact.
Might be some relationship there, that Cameron Smith. That's all I'm saying. I'm saying they look exactly alike. I'm just saying there's some similarities.
Man, I'm going with like nothing.
Just saying that people need to look into it. Just have you ever seen them in the same room? Have you ever seen them in the same room, same time?
For folks on the live stream, we have some video going on here of someone who looks somewhat similar to King Notes. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, that picture, I'm not seeing it, to be fair. But
some of these other ones, yeah, I agree. That one's not great.
I mean,
there are some others.
I really just need to grow out that ginger mullet.
That mullet is really American. Is that an Australian thing? Because that's like USA right there, right?
Yeah, it's like Cletus McFarlane, eat your heart out, drag car shit.
He looks like that. He looks like that Tiger King lad, doesn't he?
He does.
That kind of little strange mullety thing at the back there. Okay, so I've been gone for 2 weeks. What have I missed, lads? I mean, this is obviously purely for show because I have actually watched the episodes, so I do know what was talked about. But what have I missed?
Well, you've missed drama, I guess.
Well, I asked on Twitter what drama I've missed, and it was like some paid shill. Some people got paid to do marketing.
Yeah, so
they didn't disclose that they were doing marketing, and that was
not on Game of Nodes. I can tell you that.
So
nobody in this channel is making money off marketing, I don't think.
Yeah, man. Like, we need shills though. We need like a team of shills because
I agree.
We're not very good at marketing or production or anything like that.
Really, really selling. When it comes for us, it's time to sell out. We can use this as our prospectus and say, well, we're not good at marketing. We're not good at self-promotion. We're tolerably good at social media. And that's why you should partner with us at Game of Nodes for whatever your, I don't know, what do people partner on? Making money,
Simply
I guess. That's another thing we can do.
Simply Safe, your security solution. I use Simply Safe in the toilet.
That's VPNs, isn't it? It's always VPNs.
It's always VPNs.
Sponsored by Blur VPN. Sponsored by Grizzly Bear VPN. Is that actually a VPN? That sounds like it could actually be a VPN.
It is. Yeah.
Grizzly
we
Bear
can turn it into one. Yeah.
Sponsored by VPN. Oh, doesn't work.
You did miss out on good conversation. We had a great conversation with Ghost and with Thyborg on some governance type of thing. We've been talking about governance a lot because it's so fun. But we that was 2 weeks ago, and then last week, obviously, we had the great Highlander and Simon, which I'm not going to try to pronounce the actual name. That was a great conversation, but just about what's going on within the new Highlander nodes, I guess, and just what they're trying to build and those types of things. We talked again a little bit more about governance and those types of areas, but those were good episodes.
I nearly doxed Highlander because obviously they live in the UK. So I've met them, and I was just like, "Oh yeah, of course." That was a good conversation with. But yeah, no, the Thyborg one was very good as well. I thought that was really, really interesting episode. But
Barry,
what?
Yep.
Tom.
What's his name?
What
address?
Huh? What's his social security number?
Yeah.
Social.
Hang on.
Yeah, if we just if you come on the show, we kind of reserve the right to just dox you into the dark dimension whenever we see fit, as soon as we learn what your real name is. Normally it's Meow doing that to me, to be fair. But I realized also that a while ago. Actually, no, I'm not going to say that because that docks me further. But whatever. I found another way yesterday while I was going through some stuff that I'm doxed, and I was like, is there any platform on which I'm not doxed at this point? Ridiculous. So we have a couple of follow-ups, I think, Usurper, so I've got the spreadsheet up here.
We do.
And so there was a lot of talk about Horcrux. There's always a lot of talk about Horcrux on the show, but obviously I know from speaking to Schultzy and Null that we're now, and you're Horcruxing too. So it's now the hottest flavor in the Game of Nodes treehouse. But Horcrux apparently had some role to play in the Evmos double sign that happened the other day, which is that the biggest drama of the week?
Maybe the last 48 hours. Yeah, that was Steak Like Mo, right? Which I don't really know those guys at all. So I'm just talking about based on what I know. So I believe that they is a partnership with someone who seems to be quite good, honestly, from an operator perspective, that this happened to them. And again, we'll talk about it a little bit more. And somebody more on the marketing side, which I think is Crypt Like Mo. Is that right? I think that's correct. And they were in the Evmos set and I think doing somewhat well. And I think I'm not sure if there's some incentives there within that validator or what's going on, but the end result is that they double sign. And this is not a Horcrux blame situation. I think what the story is that came out is that they were signing about 97% of blocks. And honestly, on Evmos is not the end of the world. It's a fast block time. It has a decent amount of transactions. There's a lot of failed transactions in the mempool. We run like a 5950 or whatever it is on the AMD side to be able to handle that chain, and we still miss blocks, honestly. And so it's not the end of the world to miss a little bit of blocks in there. And honestly, anything that you're signing, at a decent percentage, it's not worth messing with. Or just wait until maybe there's a code change, or maybe, there's maybe just a single node and bump the hardware a little bit, those types of things. Anyway, the idea was that I think they were running a node that they felt was a little bit underpowered. And so instead of bumping that up, they ran a second node that was similar in size and wanted to put Horcrux behind it. The idea would be that I have two nodes in front, I'm not going to miss, which I don't necessarily think is I don't think that would make a difference, honestly. Because I think that's an absorb commit issue, right? Like, it's just the node trying to absorb the trend. Like, I don't know. You guys probably know better than I do, but I don't think it's not really a signing issue in terms of how fast the machine is signing. Like, I think it's more of a drive, absorb, commit type structure. Anyway, so in the midst of that, I answer my own question. I'm not going to wait for an answer from both of you since you're both on mute. But in the midst of that structure, they were setting up Horcrux, and then they had two nodes next to each other. They were changing the nodes and changing the ladder address to be able to point that signing back at the Horcrux. Be able to basically map from the Horcrux swarm out to those nodes. And in that structure, I guess the issue was, instead of having one SSH session to each one of those boxes, they had two SSH sessions pointing to the same box. And when they restarted, the other box had the validator key on it. And so Horcrux was signing and the original validator was signing. And so they realized that 15 seconds later, it's already tombstoned and 10% slash for all the delegations and yada, yada, yada.
Yeah, so I think like part of the major drama on the Twitterverse yesterday was the payback. I think there was just, they were probably getting, I'm not sure if they were getting a hard time by other validators or their delegators or what it was, but it seemed like there was a conversation about whether or not their delegators would be paid back from the slashing. So I think that was like a big thing with the Twitter side of things yesterday as the fallout from that whole situation that you just described. But on the technical side, guys, so what do you guys do when you are transitioning a signer? I know what I do to make sure I got a fucking checklist. But like, what are you guys' strategy to ensure that you don't double sign? Like, what are you doing? What are you guys doing?
Usurper, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I mean, my away from Horcrux or anything else with that, my first rule of thumb is to delete the private validator file. So no matter what, that gets regenerated from the node if it's not the validator. There's no issues in missing blocks. Like if you want to miss blocks for 20 minutes and figure out what the hell's going on, miss blocks for 20 minutes, figure out what the hell's going on. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't. So the idea is, number one, if you're like in the past, even away from Horcrux or anything similar to that, used to move validator keys between nodes, right? And it's pretty easy. I mean, they're all named the same. You can open them up and cat them, but you're like, oh yeah, this is the key. Like you're going to remember across 25 chains what this key looks like in this hash. Like it's not really easy to understand, right? So what I always do is I always keep keys local and they're on a Veracrypt container and those types of things. So I always have obviously a backup of what I know is proper. And then number two is my scripts, what I run, I delete those keys because I don't give a shit about them. Because if they get if next time it starts, if it's not there, it'll create a new one. If I'm not signing, I know something's wrong. So if I have 3 or 4 nodes and I know I'm moving a key, that first thing goes into those SSH sessions and it deletes all those keys. Because I know that no matter what, it's going to regenerate. That key is never there. So if I'm restarting 5 or 6, maybe not 5 or 6, 3 or 4 nodes, I know that only one of those has a key on it, and the rest of them are blank. And I don't have any checks on that. That's just basically the script I'm running and have some structure around that. But it's one way to ensure that no matter what, when you restart, hell, you can even build into the freaking service file if you wanted to on non-validated nodes to be able to do that. But the idea would be that it doesn't matter, so just delete the key and move on. And if you're not using like a TMKMS or like a Horcrux or something like that, where you have all that set and everything else going on, it's a real issue. And this situation, I think the only thing that they obviously could have done better is there's no reason to not go back and delete those keys off those nodes. Like and he might have done that on the one server if he was actually SSH'd into the same server twice. But I think you would have figured that out because you obviously started the service on the other server that wasn't shelled into. So there's something wrong there, right? Because you would have obviously realized what was going on because the other server should have been stopped. My guess is that they're just moving too fast, right? And you're worried about missing blocks. And there's like this real weird thing in validators. Like if you miss like 100 blocks, everybody looks at you like, who cares? Like you can miss for 5 hours. It doesn't matter, right? Like just make sure you're not doing this, which is far worse.
Yeah, but you don't want to miss for 5 hours.
Yeah.
All right, so 4 hours?
The first thing we do is we disable, we turn off Cosmovisor, which is what we use on pretty much everything. We stop the service, and then we quite often disable the system file as well, because I don't want to accidentally tab up through recent things I've done, and just by sheer luck, I'm very paranoid. People know this, I think. I don't want to accidentally hit the keyboard twice, and let's say the second or third command above is sudo systemctl start, Cosmovisor start, right? And then let's imagine I have a moment of madness. I hit enter. Don't want that to happen. So added paranoia, sometimes disable the system process for it until I'm done. But regardless, stopping it is absolutely the first thing. Second thing, any of the private state files get immediately renamed with a .old on the end of the file name. I just have a script that just mv, sudo mv both files to .json.old. So there, I can see them if I need to. We're talking also, this is about when you have the keys on the box. Obviously, we use TMKMS, so we don't have that anymore. But this is hypothetically what we do. Now, obviously, we're just shuffling sentries, so we just who cares really? But those are good sense checking things to do. It's just always, if you're going to mess around with something that could cause you a lot of problems, just rename the JSON file to .old on the end, and you can just instantly see, oh, this is a thing. I might want to keep it around until I'm done with this operation, and then you can delete it at the end. And then at the end of that, only then, do you restart stuff. When we moved from our previous setup, which was a traditional Sentry architecture with some additional steps, but we weren't using a remote signer. We took an entire day, an entire working day, booked out, no Slack, no Telegram, nothing to do it, and left all that time so that any time there was a thing that took a little bit longer than expected or something that didn't work first time or whatever, an SSH session that hung or terminated, or so. If you're doing longer or more complicated operations, if you're spinning up cloud infrastructure, which obviously we use a lot of AWS type stuff, so you can, if you're using automation to bring up a box or something like that, sometimes things go wrong and then you have to go and fix it in the console or whatever. Same for Hetzner as it is for AWS at the end of the day, because you're still, somebody is not plugging in something somewhere. It's all automated. You don't want to be in a position where you're stressed out or you're in a hurry. You want to just be like, it's fine. I've got 5 hours left in the working day, whatever. Right. And like I said, also there's a period of time where we were fully down. I think you could probably look back in the record and see us missing blocks when we shifted our Juno node over, because I actually made a mistake in the ladder configuration. And it took an hour to debug it. We missed a whole hour of blocks on Juno and then had to catch up. And do you know what happened? Nothing. Yeah. Absolutely nothing happened, because the Cosmos SDK is designed, as we've had Cosmos OGs on here a number of times, telling us that you're allowed to miss 13 hours of blocks. There's a reason for that. It's because you've got somewhere between, let's say, 74 and maybe 125 or maybe even more validators who are also picking up the slack for you. So you being down for a short period of time is not as important as you protecting your key matter, which is what, and then the second thing is obviously like Usurper says, have your keys backed up somewhere very secure, so that in the worst case scenario where you do delete stuff, you can be in the situation where the worst thing that happens to you is not that you delete your key, it's that you essentially bring up the service early or whatever that is. So, we actually could do a similar thing to Usurper and just delete our keys entirely, because we have a hard drive in a bank vault with our keys on. And in the worst case scenario, we have 7-day-a-week access to that. So if we really screwed up bad enough and it was 10 o'clock at night, we'd go to bed, sleep for 7 hours, 8 hours, like the Cosmos SDK has assumed you will be able to, and then take our laptop to the bank the next day and do it there. Yeah. That's what we'd do. That's a very convoluted and unlikely scenario, but
it's better than the opposite, right? The point is valid where that stress around trying to be worried about missing blocks is really a manufactured one. It really should not be there, right? And I saw somebody pointing out the idea around doing pointing and calling, which I think is a Japanese occupational safety thing, where like conductors of Japanese trains have to, based on things that are coming, they actually point at the sign and be able to read it out loud and shout it. So like in those situations, like your brain kind of gets out of the loop and like has to kind of focus very succinctly on what's going on. Somebody pointed to that, because in these types of situations, especially this situation too, which I think is probably the most delicate and the most, obviously, probably, other than halts and goofy halts, kind of like what happened with Evmos and bad information being shared, this transition of being able to change a signing authority is probably the second most common area that you're going to maybe double sign, right? Just running a validator is not going to happen, but this type of thing where I might have 2 signing authorities, or I'm moving between A and B, or I have a halt and somebody does an unsafe reset, and next thing you know, you're re-signing blocks you already signed. Things like that. Like those are the areas that's going to happen, and stopping and making sure you're being very clear on what's happening is important, because it's really easy to. Again, this error sounds like it's a couple errors that maybe just 2 or 3 that backed up on each other that turn into this problem, but it can happen, right? Like I don't think any of us. These are good processes that we're going through, and Null's going to tell us his since we've been talking for 20 minutes without him. But the idea is that it can happen even with good operators, right? In the heat of the moment of what's something that's going on. All right, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely is something that can happen, but obviously you can maximize your chances of it not happening by having your process, right? So like you guys both have. I mean, mine's not going to be drastically different to what you guys do. I think like we're 100% KMS now, Horcrux now anyway. So all our nodes are disposable. They don't really have any keys on them anymore. But when we were doing migrations, I actually just delete the users. So I'd start a new node. I would point the Horcrux to it. But before I did that, I'd just stop and disable the other node and keep it around just in case there was something wrong with the new setup. I'd start up the new one after I'd missed like maybe 10 or 15 blocks just to make sure that there was a good amount of misses between starting and stopping the nodes.
Yep.
So every time I do this, I always have like ping.pub or minscan or both up next to me. And as well, I might even wait for like tender duty to give me an alert that I'm missing blocks. And then start up the new node, make sure it's working properly, and then stop all the services and delete the old users, because we run a couple of networks on each box because they're plenty big boxes. And so, then pretty much nuke that user, start up another new node on there, resync it, add it to the Horcrux configuration and restart those, and then add more. But the keys, initially, we just cat them out of the config file, save them onto our encrypted area, and sync them. So, yeah, we never really, once we sort of get the key, we never really use that box again. Just to be sure, just nuke it. And then pretty much we have a configuration for each network that we just clone across the new nodes. So it's pretty easy to set up new ones. You can get them up in like 10 or so minutes. And now, Pokachu is so bloody organized with all of his state sync and snapshots that I can literally get a node up in probably completely manually, without the Pokachu magic where you press a button and sit there and get a cup of coffee. Probably completely manually typing it out. I could probably get a node up for any of my networks in probably 10 to 15 minutes, I guess.
Right.
From, new user to synced. So it's pretty good these days. That was not the case previously. We'll go back just a couple of months. You're always looking for peers. You're always having peering problems. You're always having trouble finding something, a snapshot that was close to the head. State sync was dog shit and didn't work.
Mm-hmm.
And so just a couple of months ago, it was hard to raise new nodes quickly, but now it is very, very easy and can be done really quick. So I don't see why not just nuke the old node and start again without keys added to it at all. So that you don't have any old signing material lying around on there.
One thing that actually I'm very interested in at the moment is having done quite a bit of research into running nodes on a cache, and obviously I put a pin in that because you can't do private, you can't selectively whitelist, so it doesn't work at the moment for running with TMKMS, which is what we use. But obviously it's possible to put a reverse proxy on a large box and then install Docker and then, bish bash bosh. If you were willing to go to the dark side, you could also just use Amazon managed Kubernetes service, or indeed ECS, which I have tons of Terraform knocking around from previous jobs, to run omnibus images, which are provided by a friend of the show, Tom from EcoStake. Because those images really do work very well for syncing an RPC node. And obviously, if your key matter is elsewhere, you can actually just use that then as your sentry. So that's something I'm quite interested in trying, actually. Aside from the possibility of start to move stuff on a cache, I'm quite interested actually to maybe try running a couple of big boxes. And essentially proxying to Docker containers running the chains. on there, and then pay for one really big SSD to each of those boxes rather than paying for lots and lots of Amazon storage. So I think from memory, from talking to EcoState Tom from EcoState Tom, I keep switching it around. His strat for his validator nodes is actually several large boxes that are all running multiple things on Docker containers using Omnibus. So and I think he uses a remote signing setup of some description as well. I'm not sure if it's TMKMS. I think he was talking about moving to either that or Horcrux. I think he might have a different solution that he's sort of worked out. So.
Okay. So I think that the next piece of this was we could move on from this topic, but I think after that point, as Noel pointed out before, so they had this happened, and then there was the realization of this happening, and then there was this like, this is bullshit. Why did 10% of our tokens get slashed for just a simple mistake? Which, not, you know, I can understand that, right? Like this is not malicious. This is something that just occurred, and you know, the realization that there's $50,000 or $60,000 USD that was wiped away based off of 5 seconds of just a mistake. Yeah, I mean, that's the immutable part of this, right? And that's kind of what happens when you get involved in this type of thing. And then there's some realization to say, oh shit, and I lost money for the people that are involved in here. And oh shit, like now can I spin up a new validator, and how am I going to pay these individuals back, and all these, and then we have this other kind of stuff around, you know, just trying to understand the implications of being a validator. And so I think it's a good, honestly, in my eyes, it's a good lesson for both delegators, not just theirs, but overall, and validators to understand that there's real money at play here, right? And just because ignorance or small mistakes or anything else fit into it, there's still ownership. Like this is still something that happened, and you need to take ownership of it, regardless of hey, it wasn't malicious or anything else. It doesn't matter, right? And so I think there's some realization of what's going on there.
And I think it's like now become evident that the slashings on Evmos are pretty savage. So that's not really, this 10% is, I don't think I've seen that on any other network. And even the soft slash is like 0.5%, which is a lot more than what the usual 0.1 is on most other networks. So one of the other validators got slashed the other day for a downtime, and they repaid their stakers. They were quite high on the list. It cost a lot of money to repay them for that downtime slash. So I think that was because they assumed it was like, you know, the script was 0.1 like everything else usually is, and then they upped it to like 0.5 after that. To everyone's like, hey, it's not the amount.
But then this is also part of so if you try and start a bank, validators aren't banks, it's not financial advice, blah 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 blah. But if you try and start a bank, one of the biggest things you have to do is ensure liquidity, and well, there's actually a whole bunch of things depending on what jurisdiction you're in, but you basically have like a multi-year time scale to becoming one, where you're only allowed a certain number of users essentially, and it scales. This is in the UK. I got a job offer for a startup bank once. We have a lot of startup banks and things. So you start like year one as a bank, and you have like 5 customers or like 20 customers. You're allowed to have like a tiny number, and then it scales up quite rapidly year on year. But it's all about basically ensuring continuity of service to your delegators, essentially. And like obviously validators don't have quite the same model, but this is also like we've gone around the houses a few times around, you know, when do you cash out, how do you cash out, why do you cash out, all that sort of stuff. And I think like as soon as you start looking at the slashing and business continuity and that sort of thing, it's a lot easier to look at those things as, okay, well, this was a screw up, but you know, it's okay because we have the money in the bank because we already cashed out according to a business continuity plan that said we should have enough in the bank to cover a soft slash or a hard slash. As for a hard slash, I mean, I think there's really no. Okay, so spicy take here. I think the hard slash should be your big number.
Yeah,
I don't think it should be a small one.
Is anyone promising hard slash? Frey, I don't know if anybody is, right?
Promises it because it's so savage.
I mean, and even now, like you have Emos at $2. If this was, I mean, again, depending on launch times and crypto prices and all this kind of stuff, if that was a $20 coin, you're talking $600,000-$700,000 US. Like you're not coming back.
I think if you get hard slashed in a situation where we're not regulated, I think that is the end of your validator operation on that chain.
I would think so.
I think for us, we would. I don't honestly know what we do. If we had the money, maybe we would cover it. If we had the money, we'd probably cover it because that seems like the right thing to do for a mistake on our part. If we didn't have the money, then I think we would just be saying, "I'm sorry," and then that's the end of our validator operation on that chain. Possibly the end of our validator operation. Full stop. It's kind of hard to say, isn't it? Because like you alluded to earlier, you can have a chain halt where, for complicated reasons that may in fact be developers originated or a bug or whatever, it is possible under certain situations to double sock.
Yeah, sure. And in that situation, you had, not to go back to that situation, but that situation you had even developers giving bad information because they didn't understand the details of, and just because you're same thing. I'm a validator. I don't know shit about the development chain. There are developers on these chains that don't know shit about the validating side because they're not the same skill sets, right? And they might not understand the details of the blockchain, but they might understand obviously the contracts and other types of things, right? So
there's a huge amount of stuff to know. Like, I mean, even people, and I'll say this as somebody who works on Juno, there are things about, say, the anti-handlers or the end blockers that I could easily make be like, oh, that's probably fine. And then it wouldn't be. And actually a really good example would be things that are consensus breaking when you're looking at an upgrade and going, which bits were going to be consensus breaking and which ones aren't going to be. I remember relatively recently having a conversation with some developers from another chain, and they were sort of arguing that something would probably not be consensus breaking. And I was like, well, I think it might be. And whenever I am on the "it might be" side of the fence, I'm going to call it consensus breaking because the alternative is bad, and it turned out to be consensus breaking when you maybe would have thought it wouldn't be, but it was. So there is a lot to know in Cosmos, and like the first Evermos halt is a prime example where in that situation the fault doesn't really lie with the validator. Really, if you're given instructions, possibly, or maybe it does, because maybe you should know enough about the SDK to look at their instructions and go, these instructions are wrong. But the number of people that will be able to spot that straight off the bat, you could probably fit in the back of a London bus. It's probably 30 people in the world.
Yep, I agree. It's tough. Like there's huge risk to it, and like this idea that validating is easy, I think is just. There's a heavy experience part of this, and this is a very new industry, right? I mean, I've been in this for 18 months or whatever the heck it is, and so it's not like I'm drawing from 30 years of history here, or 20 years, or 10 years, or 5, right? And even at my level, I think that I how do I say this? Not being an asshole. I feel like even though I'm not the smartest person in this conference call, I do feel that in many of the test nets that I get involved in, I'm in the top 10% of people understand actually what the hell's going on. Put it that way. And that's not a bad thing. Like this is a growing industry, but at the same point, there's real things at play here, and people I don't think really understand the risks of what's involved in that. And so both from a delegation perspective as well as a validator operator, like, yeah, you could say I'm gonna bring up a VM and it's no big deal and blah blah blah. But there's a lot of shit behind here, right? It's more than just running commands.
Yeah. So actually, another final thing I think to say on this is that the other thing that, besides everything else that we were talking about operational stuff, you just hit on it, Usurper, is that you run a lot of test nets, and now, from my memory, Usurper, because I was talking about this on Twitter, I think we got tagged in a thing saying, oh, you should do more testnets, you should be involved in testnets. It might have even been you that was saying it now. But I remembered, Blockpain making the jokes about the Astarte testnets, and we did 4 of them in 3 weeks, and an insane number of upgrades and stuff. And I think, Usurper, you were in 3 of those, maybe.
Oh yeah,
three or four of the Astarte testnets. Like,
yeah.
and those were, I mean, I think we all double signed on one of them because there was a problem with one of the anti-hand. There was some code change that we had screwed up, and then the upgrade handler balked. And I think all of the, like, something like 20 out of 30, what would have been, there were about 12 validators in the Astarte, weren't there? So it was something like 2/3 of the validator set double signed. But the time to do that is in a testnet, because, you know, that's how you learn how these things happen.
Right.
You go like, oh yeah, okay, if the chain holds and there is any kind of modification of state at that point, there is a good chance you're going to double sign. And that's why, like, there have been several Juno holds now on upgrades, on things that, you know, have not gone right. And also we had to restart the chain when we got cyber attacked. But in those situations, we also had people who had the experience of the Astarte testnets where they had double signed on a testnet to go, okay, don't worry, turn off your validator, stop your system, and wait.
Right.
And then restart it once we're all ready to go. It's things like that. And, you know, to touch wood, we won't have a breakdown that will result in double sign as a result of developer coordination on Juno, but it's not impossible, you know?
Yeah.
But we managed to navigate those problems, I think, because of that experience. Like, that is back to, but again, it's back to that calm thing, you know, the point.
Well, I think the more experience you get in things going wrong, and especially in like testnet environment, like the more confident you become with the fixes to those things going wrong, right? So over time, you develop like a mental toolkit of how to fix things. And then you can see, like, even in testnet environments, when something goes wrong in the testnet, the fucking Discord is frantic with people trying to like make the thing work, right? And no one's really sitting back and thinking about how they can make it work without just asking questions and spamming the shit out of everything. So once you, like, you know, if you've done 100 testnets and, you know, 300 or 400 upgrades, then you, like, your toolkit that you've got to handle these situations is broad, right? And then you can, you're in a situation there where you're not panicked. You know what's gone wrong. You know what to do. You can just sit back, determine what's wrong, look at your logs, figure it out, fix it, sit out while, you know, and, you know, if you're using like local signing matter, then the answer might be to just turn your shit off, like the phrase, right, and just wait for the network to sign, because your chances of double signing might have gone up by, you know, 90%. So, you know, not so much an issue when you're remote signing. But these are all the things that you do in a testnet. You know they exist. You know how to handle them, and then you can be, you know, a far better mainnet validator, particularly in a pinch. So, you know, it's like constant development, right? You're not just automatically know all about validating. It's a war chest of knowledge that you build up over a period of time, and the more exposure you have to it, the better your war chest. So while you guys are talking,
and when you get stuck, you just go ask Polkachu, right?
Yeah, Polkachu or Schultze,
right?
or Code Hands or George.
That's right.
You're like, hey man, how about this thing? So while you guys were talking before, I just did like a few random calculations, right? And so on Evmos, it looks like if you get hard slashed at the current rate of rewards and, you know, the standard 5% commission, it would take you 6 months to pay it back. 6 months of rewards to pay that back. So the network hasn't even been running that long. I don't think.
That's a really cool calculation. That would actually be something really interesting across chains to publish, to say at the reward rate, what is the payback on a hard slash? That's actually a really cool, that's a nice metric. I mean, the numbers itself it's an absolute, kind of get lost in translation, right? In this example, it's, you know, 60 grand of rewards, but if I'm a small validator, how long am I running operations to be able to do that? Or how much money should I put away from the past to be able to pay for chance of the future type of idea. That's actually pretty cool.
So I guess that's an ever increasing number too, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're like a big validator or a small validator. The payback period would be similar based on the rewards for that amount of.
Good point. Yep. Good point.
So,
yep.
Because I actually just did it on like percentage, and
yep.
I didn't work it out on dollar values. So.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a pretty easy calculation too. Like,
don't rub it in. Just like I did it while you were talking.
It's not like he's building a bridge or anything. It's an easy calculation.
It's easy for you. Okay,
My nephew asked me yesterday what like this multiplication was, and I was like, I don't fucking know, man. I use a calculator. I'm going to go stick your table's shit on the back of the toilet wall because you're always in there doing a shit. So just do that, read it all the time. Maybe it'll stick. Otherwise, just use a calculator.
It's perfect. The one last point on that,
inspirational stuff.
It's like you're so good at math and shit. And I go, yeah, mate.
Math while shitting or math and shit. The one last thing, the other follow-up we had was just around the validator training and things like that, which kind of is just on the tail end of what we were just talking about here. I was thinking more about this week because we had there's just a halt on the SAY testnet on Atlantic 1 because just of a code issue that happened when the max number of validators went down. And I guess there's two different modules within Tendermint. One of them was changed, one of them wasn't, or something similar to that. You guys would probably know better than I do. But the two things. One is I think my role in that was trying to calm people down because there was a lot of conversation around like what to do and stop nodes or start nodes and those types of things. And the idea, I think that's good value. It's thing is just to wait, let the node just dial away. It doesn't matter. Let it do its thing. It's fine. Don't take any drastic actions, those types of things. The other area was that in this instance, that the validator set was pretty inexperienced because it was, again, I don't mean to be an asshole on this, but just based on how they're doing kind of chunks, there were, and the validator names that were in there, there was a lot of individuals, which is cool. Like, I think it's great. And it's an incentivized testnet, so you have a huge amount of participation, but you don't necessarily have folks who are run this before. And so there's a lot of like basic Linux questions and like, how do I tail this out? And like just simple things that as somebody who, I mean, that face that you're giving right now, Frey, is probably the same face that the SAY team was giving, which is, oh shit, I have 75 validators that I need to get going on a specific thing. That we're doing a halt that we have, and we need to do a binary change. And what's the right change that we can do to reduce the amount of fuck-uppery that can happen in the field, right? And how do I try to not only fix the problem, but also do it in a way that has the least amount of other kind of side effects and things like that. And this idea of like, and that's not the right place to do training, right? And this idea around finding a way to allow people to be a part of these situations that are not on a project's structure, and kind of the idea around doing validator training in these types of situations, like your point, like what was going back on with Juno, like that was amazing training that might not ever happen again, and the people who were involved in that learned a shitload, but now you have 1,200 other validators that want to get going who don't have that opportunity, right? And I don't know how we create that. I don't know how we create that situation, but boy, that's valuable. And it'd be cool to be able to create a game of nodes.
Kind of sounds like SAY needs to halt a couple more times,
or maybe it's a game
of your boot camp.
It's a game of nodes chain that just constantly fuck us up, and then we.
That'd be the go. We'll just keep introducing bugs that fuck it up.
That's easy. I think we could do that, right? We could find always a fuck up chain.
I know a guy that could write some bugs.
I know a guy. Yeah, like I mean, I think for I mean, we did like 7 Gentexs in like 6 hours, right? Like it was a shitload. I remember.
That's a lot of fucking up.
It's a lot of fucking up.
We did one where we were trying to resuscitate a chain. We were actually very similar to what ended up happening with the Juno cyber attack. And it was a data point we used with the Juno cyber attack. Was we tried to resuscitate a chain by turning off all of its validators, and then essentially, putting it back together with the same ID. And it choked because there was still there was one validator who was in a different time zone and hadn't checked in, and they were just that they had already pre-committed, I think, and we all double signed. So then we had to redo GenTXs and bring up the chain from Genesis at in my time it was I think we we did something like at 1 o'clock in the morning my time.
Right.
It was like, we're going to do Gen TXs in 20 minutes time, and they're going to run for 30 minutes, and then we're going to bring up the chain 25 minutes after that. And amazingly, it all came together.
That's right.
The chain came up and I went to bed.
That's right. I think I was commenting like, why'd you wait 25 minutes? We could have done this in 5 minutes. Like at this point, like, why'd you push this out? Why is the Gentex time so far in the future? I got to wait 20 minutes for this. It's ridiculous.
20 minutes, man.
What the hell, man? I'm going to go to bed. Like, what are we doing?
Yeah, well,
Absolutely.
I didn't participate in any of those because there was like 40 upgrades at 3 a.m. I was like, fuck no.
Yeah, it was intense. Although it was so late, a lot of that stuff went wrong. European time, it probably would have been actual daytime for you, and you would have been fine.
Yeah, could have.
Are we done with
like 5 or 6 of you guys that were doing that? Todd's just chimed in. Certified.
Yeah, Todd. Yeah.
Astarte hardened validator.
That should be a badge.
Honestly, I've joked about it a few times about doing an NFT collection for the Astarte validator. I kind of think I should because it was a very, very, very difficult few weeks.
That's true.
Oh dear. But yeah, no.
So do we finish follow-up after 50 minutes?
Yeah, well,
all right.
I mean, to be fair, like the rest of it's all sort of follow-up. There are like thousands of test nets at the moment, right? Are we like loving this or are we fucking hating it?
I'm just not involved in any of them. I can't keep up with them at all.
There are lots, man. It is crazy, crazy, crazy. I stopped trying to be in all of them, just picking the ones that we think might be good main nets. So there's just so many. And there's not so many incentivized test nets though. There's a couple floating around, but not shitloads. But those incentivized test nets tend to just get completely flooded with people.
They do.
And a lot of them don't have a fucking clue what they're doing. But it is a good testing ground and learning ground still. And it's it's kind of good for the other validators too to be able to stretch their legs and their minds and help people with their issues, dig into their knowledge base and try and help other people with their issues is like a good exercise because you don't, when you've been doing it a while, you don't always have these types of issues yourself anymore. And it's sometimes good fun and good mental exercise to try and diagnose other people's problems based on a very like vague and unhelpful description of the issue.
Well, it's kind of back to the thing Meow always says, like it's okay to be a noob because everybody was a noob at some point, but it's not okay to be a noob forever, right? So that's how you kind of arrive at the kindness, is you go, well, people helped all of us. Like I know I certainly asked Jorge and Meow a bunch of really stupid questions when I think because Stargate was my first testnet back last February, January, something like that. And I know I asked a bunch of stupid questions. Like I really distinctly remember that they had very recently changed their name from Stakebird, which was their original name, to Stargaze. And I had the wrong git commit, I think, of the docs. And then I was like, these are out of date. And they rechanged it back to the wrong one. And I was like, this is ridiculous. This is obviously the wrong binary name. And then submit a PR. And then I think Jorge was just like, why have you done this?
It's like,
He was very patient. He was like, I know it's the other way around. It was correct. Now you've broken it again. I'm like, okay. Sorry about that.
Someone should create a Cosmos ecosystem trivia game because we're getting all these like random things coming up. I think the original Data Stargate should be in one of those questions. That's a pretty good one.
So there is like
tell me it exists and tell me it's an NFT and there's already a chain and I'm missing testnet.
No. There's what is it? Fucking Sif Chain do like a Cosmos type trivia thing. Trivia night. Well, so cool. Dan B was telling me about it the other day. He was doing it one other night. It's just like an online thing. People hang out and and do like this trivia. And I think it's like, you click on a window for, I'll take
Sure.
fucking nodes falling over for 100, Dan. And then like it's got a question that you have to answer and you get a score and shit. So, I mean, there are some things like that around that would probably be pretty cool to have a look at and participate in, with maybe, like fear of getting a shit score.
Yep. It's all done on chain.
Yeah, it's all like logged on chain. Your score is 2 out of 1,000. Fuck. And it gives, and it's an NFT and it goes up next to your validator.
That's right. It's a direct link on MintScan.
100% uptime, very bad knowledge of minor
no
Cosmos
shit about
trivia. Don't delegate.
Do not delegate.
Send,
But there are a good number of test nets. I mean, I think obviously we talked about Say right now. Defund is getting ready to relaunch on the next test net. Stride is coming this weekend. You guys have heard of Stride? I think we talked about that a little bit.
which one was that one?
Stride, I think, is a liquidity staking type of competitor to Quicksilver, I believe. I haven't really gotten involved in too much yet. Who else is actually getting ready to launch a testnet coming up? No, you have some more?
What, in Cosmos?
Sure.
Yeah, of course, in Cosmos. I think Defund's probably the main one. But I kind of got a little bit involved in the last one, but that syncing was an absolute nightmare, and the box I was having to use was really big, and I was kind of like, because it's not incentivized and stuff, it was like, this is actually throwing $1,000 into a hole per month in a bear market,
right?
With some additional work required, and it's difficult, isn't it? Because you're like, I think that's a good team with a good product, but
I think so too.
Yeah, I it's one of those where it's like, okay, if it were a case of putting together a validator rig for it, or if there were specific testnet things that I could kind of help with, I think the problem I have with time restrictions and stuff at the moment is that, especially as Needlecast, we're sort of taught to by some teams like, oh yeah, could you get involved with this testnet? Are you interested in getting involved in this testnet? And it's like, well, look, if the testnet is going to have challenges like, can you use our binary to submit a thing, then no, it's a waste of our time, sorry.
Right.
But if you're like, is there something we can help with, then if there's something you have in mind, then it's almost more of a consultancy thing, I guess, because my background is software consultancy and stuff, and architecture consultancy, I guess, and I'm kind of just in that space now where I'm like, I don't pretend to know everything by any means, but very time limited, and for obvious reasons, Juno is kind of the priority. So it's like, I would love to help out other chains, but I can't spend all my time running testnets.
Sure. But I assume that even an hour with you on the phone on some of these types of things, again, going back to different issues that have occurred, and not just technical, but also running successful testnets, and how to bring chains online, those types of things, I think would be valuable for anybody who's calling you, right?
Yeah, I mean, and like, I'm not the only one from Juno who reaches out to other people when they see something that they can help with. I know Schultzy, for example, is obviously not directly involved with Juno, but is very active at helping other people with testnets.
Yep.
Drawing on Astarte and other things that he's done. And there are other people within the Juno organization that actually reach out to other chains and say, hey, you might want to consider this and you might want to consider that. And obviously the Stargaze folks are also very, very good for that, because there's a lot of information has obviously flown back and forth over the last year and a half, I guess, between those two teams. So,
since we're on the topic, Kevin asked, what has been everyone's favorite and smoothest testnet experience historically?
I'm going to say Stargaze.
I would think so too.
Yeah, I think that was just the every Stargaze testnet in the run up to their launch was impeccable.
Even every upgrade, right? Like everything just kind of moves. I think my second would be probably Omniflix. We've always had really good, Sysled and team have always done a really good job at that.
But I think it also shows like those are teams that have just been in and around Cosmos for a very long time. I mean, Stargaze was being built for 2 years, and then both Shane and Jorge were in the ecosystem before that. So
right.
They have such a deep knowledge of the SDK that literally, I mean, almost no teams can catch up with that depth of knowledge now at this point. But it is why they can make those things so smooth, because they've got an extra 3 years on top of us in terms of their diagnostic experience. The thing that you were talking about, Noel, where you look at a thing with a vague description and you go,
okay. Yeah, Jorge is really good at that. I give him vague descriptions all the time. I'm like, this do that. But I think, like, you know, another way to look at it is not necessarily like, you know, like what's the best run and most smoothest experience, but you also get to look at like completely different scenarios, right? Because things happen in testnets first. So everything's first in a testnet. So when you're running 1 second blocks, that's happened in a testnet first. When you're starting a network with 800 fucking validators, that happened in a testnet first. For example, the early OmniFlex testnets were like, I think 800 strong was the first FlixNet 1. And it wasn't a complete fucking disaster, surprisingly. It actually worked. The blocks were enormous, but the thing started. I think the first time I saw fast blocks was Kuji. And then shortly after Evmos.
But now Say.
Yeah, man. And now Say, everyone's getting on that fast block.
Everybody's getting on that blockchain.
We did actually get a question about fast blocks, and I wanted to put it to you guys. Like, because it's obviously basically validator tuning and hardware. There's a combination of hardware and it's reducing block timeout, right? Is the primary mechanism. What do you guys feel about? Do you have a feeling on the fast block craze that all the kids are doing behind the bike sheds?
I think it's a trade-off, and it really needs to be specific to app chain stuff, right? I don't think it makes sense to try and do it on Cosmosm chains, because those chains, you know, people are building apps that suit that environment, right? But when you go to like the app chains like Kuji, it makes sense because you need a fast block time for that type of order book environment. But, you know, there's long-term implications of that as well. So these databases are going to be fucking enormous. They're going to be 6 times bigger than a 1 second block is going to end up being 6 times bigger than a 6 second block over the same period of time. So they already get pretty big, and I'm pretty sure no one is going to keep all that history. Like, that's a lot of dollars to you look at that over a 5 or 10 year period, right? So the amount of SSD you'd need to keep all of that history available to people is enormous. And I think it'll just become a trend of POS chains won't keep history. There'll be like a trailing history of like a few months maybe, where there's available snapshots for that. But then no one in their right fucking mind is going to have like 30 terabytes of bloody NVMe to store the history of a 1 second blockchain after a couple of years. It's just probably not feasible. So yeah, I think from that perspective, we're going to lose, basically not going to have history for these chains because of that fast block time. But also, it's harder on the hardware. The faster they're going, the more processing cycles you have to do. It's harder on your hard drives. You're going to get that wear a lot quicker on a 1 second blockchain than what you do on a 6 second. So they're all factors that I don't think anyone thinks about.
And if you pay for networking, so our second biggest cost after our hardware, and we run pretty big EC2 instances, is that we have to pay. To be fair, it's a very nominal amount for network usage, but it is actually our second biggest cost. So if block times halved on Juno, we would double our monthly cost. And the question is, what does the end user see for that? And that's coming from the perspective of people launching a protocol that could use shorter block times. So I'm kind of in two minds about it. Like, if we end up with a successful launch of how 3 second block time is more desirable than 6 second, but then this is also the question of read versus write. it's okay to have kind of slightly slower writes because we're doing a cryptographic operation. I think it's the read performance that really concerns me the most, I think, the majority of the time.
I think it's fair. There's pros and cons, and just kind of wildly just saying, hey, we want to reduce it for the sake of user experience. There's some trade-offs with that, right? And maybe the important part is that doesn't come for free, right? Like, so Shane, I was just watching Shane on Stargaze because somebody he asked a question because he saw what we were talking about before with Stake Like Mo had their issue with the double sign, and Shane asked that have Mo switched to 2-second block times? Like, yes, they've been to 2-second block times for a few weeks, and Shane just said, hey, he said Tendermint was designed for this range. Would be interesting to experiment with faster block times on testnet within Stargaze. And I get that. Like, I mean, because the ultimate piece is that you want a better user experience, and if that finality comes faster, right, especially for something like a mint or this or that or the upset things, that things happen instantly. You don't realize it's a blockchain. It's just a great user experience, right? But difficult to work backwards from that. And it's difficult to be able to have 150 validators with that. I think validator size also has a big impact on that, right? And then the hardware increases and all these other types of things come with it. So I'm not sure where that balance will work over time, but it's not free.
So you just touched on something else, Usurper, there, which has come up as a question, which is about. So there was this was in the couple of days that I was off. This is definitely something that completely passed me by. Was that there was a text prop anonymously submitted on Stargaze for increasing validator size, set size, which passed, and so that's now coming up. On Stargaze, and there's also a similar. There is a Commonwealth prop on Juno for the same thing. So this kind of seems like it ties kind of in a little bit to what you were talking about just then.
Yeah, and Stargaze actually that text prop just got changed to a real parameter change prop just today. So there's an open prop right now on Stargaze to go to 120. That looks like so far that it's passing, but we'll see kind of what happens. But that's that. Yeah, I think, and again, I mean, there's a different piece of this, which is does the actual validator set increasing actually do anything for decentralization, which I think we've all kind of hammered the drum a little bit in the past and says it really doesn't. It really doesn't in the grand scheme of things. But again, but you also want to allow, I mean, it's not a bad thing. You want to allow new validators, and you want to be able to lower the barrier of entry to be able to get in for independent validators like myself to be able to get into different chains, right? At the same point, there's trade-offs to that as well.
Yeah, well, I mean, like we were all, for an example, like we were all late to the party, right? So the Atom or Cosmos blockchain was well established when we came along, and for a lot of us guys, I haven't tried, but for a lot of the other guys that run in our circle, they would never have had the opportunity to try to get into Atom if you know the set wasn't expanding. So yeah, I've got mixed arguments all over the thing, and it's hard to land on. You know, what's the right answer? There is no right answer. There is, you know, what you come to a consensus as a group of people is the right answer. And there's pros and cons to everything, and I suppose you just have to weigh them up. So at the moment, I'm sort of in the you know, on the side of the fence to not be expanding sets at this time, mainly because they're not really economically viable down the bottom. So unless maybe Evmos might be, but most of the other chains, if you're in the like below the bottom 50 or 75, like you're running at a loss, and it does nothing for centralization that I've seen. I've seen these expansions many times, and the power still all sits at the top. People don't redelegate. It's not going to fix decentralization at all, but it does give an entry point to new validators, right? And that also comes with its pros and its cons. So if you're a WASM chain like Juno, which I was trying to argue on Twitter, probably unsuccessfully the other day, has really low load at the moment. It is basically, minting a lot of empty blocks in like 1 to 10 transaction blocks, right? Which it's capable of much more. But as load increases on the network, it starts to impact the nodes that aren't fully equipped to handle that load.
And it's also worth saying as well with that when a big contract comes along, gets uploaded, gets instantiated, whatever, this is why we're all running 64 gig and more on these nodes, is because actually Juno and Cosmwasm is very, very heavyweight when it has to do the serious operations that make the party happen. And like you were saying, Noel, if that usage goes up substantially, then that is going to pose a problem, depending on the size of the set and the hardware used, right?
But it's an unknown at the moment. You don't know how many people are running good hardware. You don't know how many people are running shit hardware. It's fair to say that the people, some people do, some people don't. It won't be evident until the load starts to increase on the network. And then, as people realize they need to increase their resources, right, you're going to end up with this situation where it is just way too cost prohibitive for people a certain way down the line. Like, and then you're going to end up with a set that doesn't have all the slots filled. People are just going to drop out. And then people who have delegated to those people, there'll be permanent delegations that get stuck outside of the set because they've jailed themselves or unbonded because they can't afford to run the hardware. And then you've got all this delegation sitting on those, because a lot of people just delegate and forget and never come back. Or when they do come back, they collect and go, oh, fuck, I've been in jail for a month and not had any reward. So, we haven't really reached that point on any network yet where, we're experiencing like high cost of hardware to run with, smaller return, because, most workloads on most networks at the moment are pretty light because of the volume of transactions. I don't think there's not really any networks out there at the moment that are fully utilized or even nearly fully utilized or 10% utilized. And, a lot of the load obviously is just from people restaking. It's just normal transactions, which are like virtually nothing. So,
yeah.
So the question is, though, in that situation, like if the changes will be at SDK level to improve performance, right? And then at that point, you're in more of a position where usage has gone up, improvements have been made to speed, and then it's kind of more natural to go, well, we have this extra performance, we have this extra need for hardware, and additionally, we can now expand the set but it's also back to, there is a little element of, other than bringing new validators into the set, what the purpose of going up from arbitrary number to arbitrary number is.
Yeah. Agreed.
Yeah. Like the floor is always going to get expensive, and there's always going to be like the push to expand it again. And where do you stop? Like, do you want a 500 validator set just to keep it cheap for the people coming in at the bottom? Like, that's the advantage of being there at the start. You get to be on the network. You get to build, community around your nodes. And yeah, I don't see the point of ever expanding the set to be inclusive, as good for, the network performance and the network as a whole. Like, if there's a good reason for it other than that, I would love to hear it. But at the moment, it just seems like we just keep expanding these sets just to keep it cheap for people to come on.
It's kind of like dealing with FOMO, isn't it? And it's like sometimes you miss a thing, and that's fine. Go find the next thing, because the next thing can be just like you pointed out, Noel, we were all late to Cosmos in terms of the very early change of launch, like Cosmos, Regen, Akash.
Exactly.
And we all joined Stargaze and Juno and these other projects that have come along, and we found a way of making that work for our operations. And those opportunities are out there. When we first got involved in Cosmos, I think all of us got involved before the last bull run. So again, it was looking at the position of going, certainly I remember doing the sums of, oh, well, if the price on Stargaze is particularly good, we can probably afford an AWS rig rather than running on Hetzner, which will help my blood pressure, you know? So it's also about expectations. I think if we just come out of this big bull cycle, and there's a lot of interest in doing this from either people who are new to it or people who have got a background in it, whatever, it doesn't really matter. But it's that kind of FOMO thing, maybe that entitlement thing that kind of rubs me up a little bit the wrong way, because I think we're in such a big tent, and it's like we're sat around this table, we're drinking a couple of beers, and it's like, dude, there's literally a table there with free beer on it, and nobody is touching it. Nobody is touching it because nobody has yet sat at that table. You don't need me to share a stool with you. There is an entire table, and I would be glad to walk with you over to that table and show you how to pick up a beer.
Well, I don't know. We were just talking about how many testnets there are right at this moment, and these are all promising networks that are coming out. Like,
some are incentivized.
Yeah, some are incentivized to get you like starting bag, and that was the advantage of the Stargaze testnets, right? We were there I wasn't there from the very beginning, but some of us were there from the beginning, and then that gave us an opportunity through helping them develop the network to be able to get rewarded and build a bag for the launch and have a good long-term perspective on that network. So same for many networks. You get there, you work with them while they're developing it, and then they reward you for that, and then that's how you get your way into that network and secure your place in the val set. But just like, I don't know, people, it seems like people just don't want to think about other consequences and only just want to create an entry point at a cheaper price. It's not just like, I'm not talking about, it's not just new validators. Like, it's, this sometimes comes as well from the people who are, managing, like the foundations or the people who are managing it. They want to be able to create that cheap entry point for people as well. So,
right. Well, they want to create opportunity, right? Or at least the idea that there's opportunity there. This is the other issue with me, which is this is the right conversation. It goes directly in the face of like the interchain security thing from the Cosmos Hub, which is, hey, new chains don't need to set up validator sets. Let's just use what's in Atom, and they can use that from a governance perspective. And this is the validator set, which I think, I don't know, but I'm not in the Atom space, so maybe I'm biased within that. But my idea is that why are those the selected ones? Like, there are new chains, there are new validators. And Kevin just pointed out, Kevin Garrison said, new validators bring new development, new viewpoints, and new innovation. It's exactly right. So why are we tied to the same 125 or 50 validators that have been there since the beginning? Just because? Is that the limit of the innovation? Is that the limit of the new ideas? Is that the governance viewpoint that we want on all chains that choose to use that validator set? And I think that's wrong. Like, I think that chains will grow and chains will die, including the Atom. Like, there's nothing that says that that's going to be the center of the universe forever. And so as that naturally grows, why would new chains be tied to that same structure? And I think that just goes against the whole idea of what we're trying to build. So that's why I've been always kind of negative around that idea, is because it just seems like it's, we're kind of limiting ourselves to say this is the structure that we want to be able to work with, or the viewpoints that have already been set.
I think layered security, though, is the kind of answer to that. Like, there is a good idea in there somewhere, and actually, moreover than layered security, I suppose there's a future world in which it becomes even more arbitrary, and you can actually bring in additional validators from outside either of the sets that you're layering into it, which is an interesting theoretical idea for expanding a validator set. Mm-hmm. But I guess we're always going to run into the problem that there fundamentally is a difference between SDK only, if you like, networks and CosmWasm networks, or even EVM networks, where there is an additional substrate on top that has additional performance implications, that has additional configuration implications, that has all these different variables that are going to affect end users and affect the performance of the chain in a way that is outside of the normal functioning of the SDK, and that's what's kind of governed by ICS consensus, really. So yeah, there was another question in here. Let me see if I can find it to pick up on kind of validator stuff. Like, should somebody asked on Twitter? I'm sorry, I forgot to write down the name. Should self-stake be a factor in formulating the stake a given validator has in a chain? Which this is all back to kind of the ranking of validators, isn't it? But I thought I was just reminded of it because obviously, if you do an incentivized testnet, as a validator team, you're quite often given a delegation to self-stake when the network starts, right? But if a validator joining the set later might have a much smaller self-stake that they've actually bought themselves. And to Kevin's point in the chat, that would to me indicate a much higher belief in the network potentially than somebody who arrived early and said, I also have a high belief in this network to give my time and energy to it. But, a year down the line, 2 years down the line, 3 years down the line, that looks like a disproportional. They probably have the same level of belief in the network, but it's timing, right? None of us are any smarter than anybody else. Just some people are first, right?
Yeah, like being early has its advantages, right?
Definitely.
No matter where you are, being early is like a big advantage. When networks launch, it is a race to try and get in that top area because we know, whether we like it or not, we know that that's the easy delegation area. Once you're there, people just delegate to you without thought. So that's, as much as we hate to think about that or admit that, that is like whenever a new network goes live, that's the scramble.
Right.
And that's no lie.
And
that's every single validator. That's not like, people might say they've got good ideals and all this type of crap and talk about decentralization and all that type of shit. But when a network launches, that is the scramble from every single validator on that network, is to try and get like a good position to get the easier delegation as time goes by.
Jeremy Irons, the actor, has, if you guys have seen the movie Margin Call, which is about 2008 U.S. housing crisis and really the fall of loan structures that was created around kind of mortgage bonds is really what the issue was. Jeremy has a great speech in that movie. That movie's awesome. Everybody should, even if you're not in the U.S., it's just a great movie to watch. He says there's 3 ways to win this business. Is either to be first, be smarter, or cheat. And he says that we don't cheat, which there's a lot of validators who cheat because you kind of see that. We've talked about that here. You could be smarter. There's a lot of validators who are really smart around how they do operations. He's like, it's a hell of a lot easier to be first. And I think that rule applies here as well, right? There's a lot of benefit to be early in sets and be able to get involved in those test nets and those types of things. And there's other aspects of that as well. But I mean, those 3 things are still pretty damn appropriate for this ecosystem as well as that financial
Absolutely.
ecosystem.
And you're providing a service in a test net too, right? You're not just getting free. Like right. It's sometimes they take a very long time. Sometimes they take a lot of labor. But they're providing a service for a return, and your return is your initial stake in a lot of cases and your initial position in the chain. So yeah, absolutely, being first has its advantages, and I think it's in a lot of cases like the biggest advantage, except well, we say when validators cheat, but that's in our opinion they're cheating because of our ideals of what validators should, the rules they should adhere to, which is our arbitrary set of rules. There's no hard and fast rule. There's like what we think is socially acceptable, and then not everyone's going to fucking care.
Right.
But then there's like, some people just have good business models or well thought out business models to be able to attract that delegation and work that into, how they run their ecosystem as a whole, which, ask any of us, we might think that's kickbacks, but ask anyone else, they might think that's a valid thing. And that might lead to concentration of power, but everything's got its nuances and everything's got its like, pros and cons, and it's not necessarily cheating. It's cheating in their opinion. So.
I think Jeremy was talking the same way, right? Like I think that example wasn't necessarily illegal cheating. It was doing things that they felt that they were immoral, like they didn't, it felt in their moral structure. And I think, that's why we talk about this stuff as well. Like, but
no spoilers, but from memory, that point in the film is like very, very specifically before they do something that is grey, but they are first on.
That's correct. Yeah, they sell all these contracts and like basically the rest of the market falls, but they are able to survive, right? But again, they're first. So
yeah.
Yep.
So Juno.love has just posted in the chat and just said a question about self-stake was about getting to the fact there are a few validators in the top 10, less than a dozen Juno self-staked. I think that's probably, so obviously there are validators that actually don't have a very large amount of self-stake, but that's very, very uncommon, purely because you'd fall out of the set or radically change position in the set if your delegator structure changes. So I think probably what's going on there is just that people are delegated with different wallets, with alternative wallets. I think it's probably the case that almost any validator, certainly all of us on this call, and most of the validators we know, probably their self-staked percentage is not reflective of actually how much they are self-staked.
I don't know. We're going to say the same. I think we're going to say the same thing. But that idea that there might be multiple wallets that are we do the same thing. Like we try to keep a decent amount on the validator wallet because they're all ledgers. I got a stack. Look at this. Like we have a stack of ledgers that are sitting around that are associated to those validators. There you go. Jingly bag
of ledgers.
Those are in a bank vault.
Ray's just like going, fuck, man. Why are they pulling you down? They're going to pull your toenails out, man.
The ledger.
I honestly was a little bit like, you just keep it a sock by your you absolute degen.
Degen. Mine are just sitting on the shelf. So that's one step up from mine. Mine just get lost. But whatever. How are you going to control that? But the other case is that we have like personal stuff that we stake to that as well. It would be interesting to see the difference between that. And there's a difference between that and when those rewards and commissions come back and they're just IBC'd off. That's a little bit different. Like we do to our 10% to this Rhino Gives thing that we're starting, as well as, dude, I gotta go get mine.
These are my spares.
And our rule is that we 10% off all the commissions, and then whatever's left, we stake half back to the validator, and then the other half we take as cash, or at least it comes into a core account that we can decide what we want to do with it because we need to run ops. And so it's like 10% to commission, 50%, whatever's left, then 50% to the validator because we're giving back on the chain, and 50% back to us. But that's different than, I think, what everyone has seen is that it's just IBC'd. And once it goes in that structure, then you're not really sure what the hell's going on, right? And if that's actually IBCing out to be staked back in, which doesn't really make any sense, or what's happening with that. So I think there's Rama's on the chat as well, because this is one of his areas, is to be able to try to give more information around what validator operations are doing and who's being kind of honest in that structure. And so I think it's all over the board. I think, I don't even know.
I love this. How do you know if a validator uses a ledger or is raw dogging their keys? Oh god. So like I just looked at my validator for Juno, right? So we are like our self-staked, on the validator wallet is like 2%, right?
Yep.
But our total self-stake is probably closer to like 10%. So we definitely have token elsewhere, and that's, some of it's for tax reasons, some of it's for like, security, some of it's for, there's various reasons to have different wallets. But I personally think that like the corporate validators, like the ones who tend to have very low self-stake with larger wallets elsewhere, should make more of an effort to like have a higher self-stake. It's not like they can't afford it. It just doesn't. I think it's more of like a security policy because of the amount of hands on particular keys or something like that.
Right.
But they're more of a corporate structure, whereas we're more of like we've got our own ideals.
And it's worth just pointing out at this point that, like, in the independent validator teams, the largest ones are usually 2 to 3 people, and some of those larger operators who are also running on ETH, or maybe some of the like near Solana, some of these really big ticket, big money situations, they've got like 50 or 100 staff. So
Right.
they are the size of technology company that they have a full-time security person on staff who is like, you can't SSH onto a box without jumping through 2 Bastion hosts, and we have a key policy, and you can't just spin up a server if you want to do some testing, and all that kind of corporate stuff that you would expect of a company that's got an HR department. So there is also that. That's worth pointing out. So some of it is probably less, like Noel says, it's less about this and that. It's more about just what you see of how the sausage is made, because they're much bigger organizations.
So Noel, what you're saying is that some validators are more multi-sign and some are more bunch of ledgers sitting in a sock.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, some people like have systems. I have ledgers.
Me too. Got the sock going on.
I mean, it's got a zip. It's not a sock. It's like a little.
It's good. And you'll just tie a knot on the top of it.
I trick people by writing memory on there. So like, oh, that's not a bag full of ledgers. That's like USB.
That's literally your security policy.
Yeah.
Mine is literally like a bag full of all of the stuff.
Mine's misdirection.
It's the level of paranoia.
Memory.
As soon as the paranoia gets you, though.
And really secure toenails.
Bag of coins. Too funny.
How are we going on our list, guys? I think
we're pretty much squared away. There was just what are we excited about in the upcoming week? And I believe somebody, possibly Usurper, put green candles.
Well, it wasn't until I put it in the spreadsheet and I went to shit. So it's the last time I write green candles on anything.
Wait, it's gone bad?
Well, today has been bad. The last hour's been okay. Today has been dropping, but the week has been pretty good. We're starting to see a little bit of turnaround, and at least some, not so much for eMoney and Evmos, but everything else that at least I'm tracking within the Cosmos has some good uplift.
So is this the pump we've been looking for? Is this like the turn? Is this the bottom, or is this just another little bullshit pump before it keeps going down? It's about a 50% at the moment, right?
It's a 50%.
When you look at ETH, it's about 50%. ETH.
Yeah, ETH's at $1,500 US, and Bitcoin's finally above 20 grand. It's at 23,000 something. So I mean, I'm guessing as it goes up, it's going to do like its usual humps, right? And hopefully those dips don't drop down to where it was. But I think in all these situations, I've been surprised on just how far some of these things will drop.
I'm glad I don't try to chart. I don't want that kind of stress.
I have it above my head. I need to get rid of this. Like it's miserable. Just literally looking at it all day. It's a bad. Like when I look, you see me looking up on this podcast. When I look up like this, I'm looking at prices. That's not good. It's not healthy.
When you look up, I can just see like a little
like fuck
emoji tier.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Because I see the world in emojis now. I was talking to my girlfriend the other day on my phone, and it was on a platform that didn't support like the semicolon, shortcut.
Oh yeah, like a Discord. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just kept typing all these things in between semicolons, and she's like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I'm like, "They're emojis." She's like, "You're just putting words between semicolons." And I'm like, "Yeah, man. Fuck."
It's like
she's
any.
Like, why do you type emojis? It's what I do.
Or any messaging app that doesn't support a simplified markdown, and you do the thing to make it italic or something,
right.
and
Me
it's
too.
just underscores, and then people are like, "Why did you do that?"
Rama's just called me out for having a girlfriend. Oh, girlfriend, big relationship haver, show off.
Ever.
I mean,
name dropping girlfriend.
It's pretty lame of you to have a life, Noel. So there is that.
I try to avoid it religiously by living in my dungeon.
At least